We've used the magic mask to make a mostly workable skin key. Next, we'll see how it can help with what used to be extremely time-consuming roto tasks and garbage matting. Now, I want to preface this by saying that this tool does not replace rotoscoping as a skill. It is still important to be able to step in and take on a challenging shot manually if the magic mask is not able to bail you out, and it won't always be able to do that. So we're on this shot, and this is the shot where Wayne walks in front of the actress here. Quite a difficult shot to match to later shots in the sequence. We'll work on that more later on. I've got an old-fashioned face vignette here, which I've tracked to the dealer's face, and I've done some manual keyframing to compensate for the occlusion. And I've put a very slight but important contrast adjustment inside. What I want is to make sure that it's not also adding a circular shape that may be visible to some viewers when Wayne walks in front. So what we need to do is make a matte which is going to matte out the shape that we have on the face of the dealer, and we're going to use the magic mask to do that. What I will do is I will go before our face vignette. I'm going to make a new node. And I can, if I want to be fastidious, I can label this one and call this shirt matte. And now I'll scrub to a frame with a good view of the shirt and place a tracking marker. So we'll take a look here, go into our interface, and we're going to place a tracking marker. This time, the reference frame is not at the start of the clip, and it's important to keep a note of that in case we want to add any additional tracking markers later. Now I will hit the track forwards and backwards here. And now let's check out the mask. As per usual, in fast, it's got very hard edges. But it does work pretty well. I've got an issue with this kind of belt being a gap in the mask. I'm not too bothered about that for the sake of this demonstration. We just, add a little garbage matte to that for a few frames later on. So we need to refine this edge. But before we rush in, we have a challenge. Wayne's shoulder is closer to the camera and thus more out of focus here than this shoulder, which is further away and thus a little bit sharper, although still soft. So we have a problem. Our mask needs 2 levels of feather. Here it needs to be quite feathered and blurred, and here it needs to be less feathered. So we're going to have to do some keyframing. We already know how we can keyframe movement, so let's look at how we can use keyframes to manage almost any form of control we have within Resolve, and it's good for instances like this. I'm going to open up the keyframe control panel I have on the right hand side here, and I'm going to turn my mask overlay back on, and I want to scrub to where the most blurred part of the shoulder is, and we're going to dial the blur in here. So I'll start by opening the panel for corrector 3. We are on corrector number 3, we can see up here. Now it can be a bit of a guess as to where we should be placing our keyframes, as it's not as obvious as just using the power window track on this interface. The magic mask finesse controls lie within the qualifier track on the keyframe interface. So what I will do is I'll hit the orange diamond here, and I want to right click and I'll add my first dynamic keyframe. And now I want to dial in the blur radius and also the I/O ratio. Oops. Until I'm happy. And this is where a lot of heavy blur can really quite help us. So I can see that the pink gradient is up there in front of the face, and then I can just dial it in. And if you drag too much, it will lag and jump all at once. And dial the I/O radius back a little bit. And I'd say this is an appropriate level of blur for this point. So I've now got my keyframe and the correct blur. I want to scrub forwards. Again, I'm not bothered about the strap for the purposes of this demo. And I'm going to place another dynamic keyframe because I don't want it to gradually fade here. I want it to be a bit more of a sudden change. And then we're going to dial It's a bit soft there. We're going to dial the blur radius back. And that's an appropriate level of blur for this part in the shot. I might push the IO out a little bit. Maybe not, and I can blur out. And that's a more appropriate level of blur. And now I've got a good amount of blur here. And if I click on this keyframe, you can see the values here. And when I click on the last keyframe, we can see the new values. I'm playing it through. That looks to be a pretty good mask. So now I've got the mask. What I can do is I can take the alpha output of this node, feed it into the alpha input of the face vignette. And then in the face vignette, I need to make sure that this is treated as a matte and not a mask. So I will go to my mask controls. So what I want to do here is click this button, which will invert the alpha received from the previous node. And now, when we check, lo and behold, we've got the face vignette masked out. Like I said, it does turn up with the strap. I'm not too bothered about that for this demo. And there we go. Easy garbage matting out of a face vignette, which did not take too long at all. This has been a good look at how to use the magic mask for garbage matting and how to use keyframes for attributes other than position. Click on, yeah. So let's keep going and click on through to the next lecture once you're ready.